So, years ago, I was an evangelical youth pastor at a church in McMinnville, Oregon called Adventure Christian Church. Our motto, our mission statement, was making disciples who make disciples who make disciples. And we were planted as a church in a movement, and I bet you might be able to guess what their mission statement was. We are planting churches that plant churches that plant churches. All of it in this interest of replication, right? Church growth. And we equated growth, numerical growth, filling the chairs type of growth, having so many people that can no longer be comfortable in the building, standing room only kind of growth with faithfulness to God. One day, I was in a staff meeting, and our senior pastor had called us all together, and he was deeply interested in how much we were going to grow our respective ministries by that year. You know, this was after we had a church retreat where we went on walks, and we were supposed to listen to the Holy Spirit telling us like how much our respective ministries were going to grow by. You know, hey, Giuseppe, what is the Spirit telling you the youth group's going to grow by? Oh, I mean, we've got 50 kids. Maybe 5? Really? The Spirit is telling you 5? 5 kids? What are you thinking the Spirit's saying we're going to grow by? I think God's saying you're going to grow by at least 15 kids. Oh, the Spirit's telling you that? Oh, man. I don't know about that. And of course, this is the criteria we get graded by later, right? When you do a performance review. Did you match what God was telling you? So we're in the staff meeting, and one of the other staff people, he was the person who ministered to our seniors, but he was not our senior minister, which can be confusing, right? He pushed back on our pastor, and he said, can't it just be enough that we're being faithful to what we believe God is calling us to, and we're trying? Can't that just be enough? Like the people in my ministry, they're growing spiritually, I think. And in a rare moment of rage, our senior pastor, who is usually a very calm and collected individual, stood up and screamed at my colleague, my coworker, my dad. Screamed at him. All of you need to work harder. All of you need to work harder. It's not enough. I will not be the pastor of a church that got stuck at 300 people. Our pastor was concerned with growing his career, his reputation, his influence, his income, his power, and that of our church. Our church, which I did not know at the time, was what I had heard other people refer to as an institution. I'm still in my early 20s. The church is not an institution. The church is, it's God's people. And I came to realize over time that I was indeed working for one of these religious institutions I had heard a bit about, and one that was very much concerned with numerical growth over all other things. Numerical growth over people. Putting a church over people. Putting a religious institution over people. But not all of us are pursuing such a world, right? Not all of us believe that this is what our churches must be. Indeed, when you start looking around, you start seeing that there are actually quite a few of us who are pursuing the radically inclusive, radically loving, radically peaceable work of Christ. Like what we see Jesus in the story that we just read doing, cleansing the temple. We see a number of faith communities and people of goodwill consistently trying to put people over their organizations. Now, in our story, Jesus comes into the temple and he's flipping these tables over and he's freeing animals and waving a whip and he's chasing these money changers out. Now, most of our lectionaries or narrative lectionaries touch on a version of the story every year. So, I'll save a lot of the details for when we come to it in a few months. But I do want to touch on what this represents. The temple in our stories represent the worst excesses of a religious institution, dictating the cultural norms of the times, and clinging as hard as it could to political power, even through the worst of moral compromises with the Roman government. The Roman government who had colonized its people. And they also, the institution, profited heavily out of people's religious devotion, especially the vulnerable, the traveler, the poorest among them. And in this way, Jesus declares that this is not the will of God. And also, importantly, that this is not the way that things have to be. We should not be turning our encounters with God into some sort of product to be peddled. You have turned my Father's house into a marketplace. Now, you may be wondering, what does any of this have to do with growth? After all, the name of this sermon on your bulletin is Harvest Season Growth. So we're going to get to that, right? What does the temple have to do with this? And you may be concerned to see such a title. If you're like me, the little hairs on the back of your neck raise up a little bit when you hear people talking about growing the church. You may be wondering, am I going to tell you to go out and proselytize? I'm not going to tell you to do that. That's the furthest thing from my mind. I'm bringing this up because, well, first of all, several of you brought church growth up as what you feel God is leading this community towards, or what your deep hope is for our church. And I respect that. I told you when I started the series, I wanted to be collaborative and touch on these things that you put down as your hopes. So even though this one makes me a little bit uncomfortable for, the reason I stated a few minutes ago, the story I gave an example of, it does matter. And it matters because several of you, this is your deep hope. And because I think there is a healthy way to look at this. We're going to get to that. And I will also point out that in my experience, most church-going but progressive-leaning folks are sheepish about inviting others to join their community. Have you ever seen that? Yeah. And I think we have good reason for being sheepish, for being a little shy about this. Because if you've ever had somebody try to convert you, you don't want, and you know how hurtful that can feel, you don't want to hurt the folks around you. And you don't have to. You shouldn't be expected to. But I do believe that we have something positive, something good we can share with other folks. And it shouldn't come through us trying to change them. But there's good happening in Park Rose, in the Park Rose area. And I think it is stuff worth inviting people to. Now, I don't want you to worry about growing. And I also want to adjust some expectations. Now, this is an expectation that's important to adjust here at the beginning of our relationship. If you are expecting that we are going to grow because of my preaching, I have bad news for you. My preaching is not going to be what causes church growth. And if you're expecting that we're going to grow because of teaching, that's not what's going to do it. And I don't suspect that we're going to grow through our special services. It could be the best Christmas service in the world. It's not going to cause us to grow. We are not going to grow because of our programming or advocacy efforts or our activism or our community partnerships. The number one reason that people give for why they start going to a church, are you ready for it? It's simply because somebody just invited them. It's just that they asked them, hey, you want to go to church with me sometime? You want to come to the potluck? Do you like potlucks as much as me? We're going to have a potluck. You don't even have to come to the service. Just come to the potluck. Hey, we're doing showers once a week with Cultivate Initiatives. And we could use some help for that. Would you be interested in helping? Hey, we're working with this micro village, We Shine, and we could use some assistance. Hey, we're having a craft bazaar. Nobody announced this. I get to announce it again. We are having a craft bazaar to celebrate our 110th anniversary, October 7th. Do you want a table? Want to come with me? We can invite people to things. If your big concern is how do we get people to come into the church, well, there you go. I just want to get that out of the way. That's how that stuff happens. But I will say that those other things do play a role in folks wanting to stick around. So that does matter. Now, with that said, for those of you who are like, what's the magic trick? Well, it's just simply doing what you would do with any of your friends for something you care about. Hey, you want to come with me? I'm selling doilies at the bazaar. You want to sit with me? We Shine's having an open house, 1 o'clock today. This is another announcement. Do you want to come with me to the open house? Do you want to see what We Shine's doing? But I want to point out that we should not be concerned with growing. That should not be our focus. And I don't think we should be so concerned or preoccupied by growing that people feel overly greeted. Ooh, I've had this experience so often. I went to a church one time, and this lovely lady was so excited that I was there with Stephanie, and she was very excited that my name was Giuseppe Amato. And she took me by the hand and introduced me to everybody in the church, and she said, everybody, this is Giuseppe Amato. And 4 times this happened. Oh, is he part of the 4 Amato families of Portland? I have never heard of the 4 Amato families of Portland in my life. No, get this. He's part of a brand new 5th Amato family of Portland. Wow. And this is his wife. What's your name again, dear? 4 times. Stephanie got the, what's your name again? Stephanie again. It's still Stephanie. And after the service, we got the parking lot handholds. Hey, you have to come back next week. You really have to come back. We need volunteers working with the children. And you're a lot younger than the rest of us. You have to come back. And guess what we were not super excited about doing, right? It felt kind of manipulative and weird, and we couldn't put a finger on it at the time. It made us kind of feel fussed over. And honestly, most of us don't want to feel fussed over. We want to be included, but we don't want to be fussed over. And sometimes it can feel gross, It can carry that ick on it. Like, do you want me? Or do you want another person who is my age or who might look like me, right? Or who has my name? We just really need another Giuseppe Amato. I want to let you know, church, that you should not feel insecure. You should not feel desperate. You have nothing to feel insecure about, in my view. We're celebrating our 110th year, and you know what? That's amazing. That's beautiful. And we're doing beautiful and needed things with one another and in partnership with our neighbors. Most of our churches are not doing that, but we are. We care about our neighbors. We're trying to put people over institutions. That's Jesus stuff. That's God's will on earth as it is in heaven stuff. And on top of that, we love and we care about one another. We have community here, and we also have community beyond these services, beyond these walls with our neighbors. End of the day, some folks would love to be invited into joining us for some of these things, and some of us would love to come to a worship service. People like me, early in my deconstruction, I didn't know that churches like this existed, but I desperately hoped that they did. I met Kari and Ray at a church a lot like this. It's one of our sibling churches, Waverly Heights United Church of Christ, and found such lovely community there. And it helped my spiritual journey tremendously to have this spiritual family that loved me as I was. And if I said something like, I'm not really sold on the doctrine of hell, they'd be like, great, that's fine. Why? You don't need to be. And if I said, like, hey, I just would like a place that my siblings would all feel welcomed at, that my friends who are queer or trans would feel comfortable at, they'd say, yeah, of course. That's totally reasonable. That's why we're here, right? So some people would love to just be invited to a service like this, people like me. And also others who have no interest in spirituality or in God or Jesus, but still deeply value the work that we're doing. Folks who would just simply love to know that you don't have to just feel helpless about housing insecurity in the Portland area. You could actually roll up your sleeves and do something. People who want to know, like, there are others we can join with and advocate for a livable Portland instead of just feeling bad that folks get priced out of their homes. There are folks who would just simply love to know that they could bag lunches and help hand them out, or partner with some of our organizations who are trying to reform that, who would love to work in the garden. People with maybe greener thumbs than me. You don't want me in the community garden. And those folks, and this was one of the things that really drew me to this church, in your search and call documents, you made it clear that people who come and join in partnership and who are doing the work here in the Park Rose area, sometimes in conjunction with us, they are members of this community. They matter here, and they don't have to do anything to matter because they're people, right? They don't have to work for services here. They don't have to come here and show us their church membership for us to sit with them, walk alongside them, or invite them into some of the stuff we're doing. Again, that is more rare than it should be, because too many of us, far too many of us, puts the church as an institution over people. But I love that this church is not doing that and does not want to do that. Now, I have one last point for those of you who are starting to get a little squirrely in your chairs. We're reaching an end point. This has been a theme throughout this message, but it's worth addressing all on its own. Some of the best advice I ever got in my dating years was to not be concerned with finding the right person, but rather, maybe some of you have received this advice, rather being the right person, right? Church growth has some parallels with dating. Now, the worst kinds of it, the Hillsongs, the Bethels, the adventure Christian churches of the world, are going to present themselves as attractive as possible with great music and fun and activities and the promise of community. And then as you stick around longer and you learn their values, you realize that they're much more interested in using people than they are with loving them. But the best kinds of churches, in my opinion, are the ones who are interested and are pursuing loving people and are not interested in using them. The best kinds of churches, the churches I am proud to associate myself with, focus on living into the Jesus stuff, trying to be the right people, and they do not care about attracting the right people. A friend of mine, Reverend Sarah Rosenell, said, folks think that the church ought to be a museum of saints, or it ought to be a carnival, but a church is supposed to be a hospital. And the thing is, we're all tending to our wounds together. I agree. That sounds kind of Jesus-y to me, right? And that's what I see here. And this is what I encourage us to keep doing. Being a community filled with folks who themselves are growing, we may say spiritually, growing in love, growing in their love for God and their neighbors as themselves. So, with all of that said, Park Rose, what does it mean for us to focus on growing as people instead of focusing on growing in people? What does it look like for us to continue growing in congruence with our values? What does it look like for us to grow spiritually instead of growing the numbers of the church? Now, I'm asking this with a real keen interest in your collective wisdom. And we have a lovely note taker for us. What does this mean to you? What does it mean for us to grow as people instead of grow in people? Now, some of you said in your harvest document you wanted more interactive services. All right, so here's my sincere hope. We get at least 3 hands. Some of you are thinking about it, though. It's good to noodle. What does it mean to grow as people, to focus on growing as people instead of focusing on growing in people? Rita. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. For those who couldn't hear, Rita said, it means that we grow in our love for and with one another. Absolutely. That's hard work, too. It's good work. Yes. Live as Jesus showed us. Yeah. Jessica. Yeah, I love that. Did everybody hear Jessica? Yeah. We grow as a community and we share ourselves with one another and we keep showing up for one another. That's very vulnerable. Yeah. Yes. Listening to what calling we have and following through with them. Yes. Yeah. Travis. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Absolutely. Listen to each other. I'm going to add with curiosity and respect. Yeah. Kari. Mm. Yeah. Thank you. I do believe that's really important. And I also think that is communal work because it's so easy, if it just depends on one person, to miss it. And then 2 months go by. You're like, well, what happened to so and so? Oh, well, X, Y, or Z. So and so said this to them. What? They got sick. It is a terrible feeling when you find out that somebody got sick 2 months ago and nobody contacted them. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Hmm. Now, I've missed out on a lot of drama because I'm new and every community has drama. I just assume because I've never experienced a community that doesn't have drama. Maybe there is one out there. If you belong to it, please share what that experience is like because I have not had it. But I imagine that means that there is going to be some mending that has to happen in the weeks and the months ahead. And it's not because uh, there's people who've been like vile, wicked creatures. It's we've gone through COVID and interim ministers and changes, right? So let's check in on one another and let's do some of this stuff to grow as people. You know, that's the stuff that matters. In the weeks ahead, I am going to focus on some of this. I'm going to focus on, well, next week I'm going to focus on fostering greater connection and intentional relationship within our spiritual community. I do kind of get the sense that we're still kind of coming out of the COVID lockdown norms. So is everybody else, even though it's been like 3.5 years since we had to shut our doors. But the good news is we can re-knit these bonds. You know, that's going to be good stuff, good work, potlucks, and coffee work. And the week after that, we're going to focus on fostering greater connection with those who are experiencing hurt or exclusion within our broader community. And why are we doing that? It's not for the sake of getting them here. It's for the sake of people, just because we care about them. All right?